Hello everybody, Luke Schulte, field agronomist for Beck's Hybrids. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about what to expect from our post-emergent Enlist herbicide application. So for many of us, we're using the Enlist technology and the Enlist herbicides for the first time. How do they differentiate and what should we expect as compared to what we've utilized in the past, whether it be Liberty or dicamba applications? One thing we've learned through past experience is some level of crop speckling or a little bit of crop response is to be expected. In front of you is are some pictures from a field that was sprayed about 4 days ago. So last Friday, particularly warm day, over 90 degrees. Some level of leaf speckling is pretty common with specific tank mixes with Enlist herbicides. In this particular field, we use Enlist, or the grower use Enlist 1 plus glyphosate plus clethodim plus a full rate of an AMS solution. And that speckling occurs where that overall spray material, actually those droplets landed on that leaflet. When we mix Enlist 1 plus say glyphosate or Liberty, plus clethodim plus AMS, which is a pretty common tank mix, we can expect this level or this type of crop response. Now it will be more enhanced and more significant during times of heat, maybe heat and humidity, like was in this picture. We had pretty high heat that particular day, but some level of speckling is to be expected with many Enlist herbicide applications, especially with this tank mix. Now you may be asking the question, but does this hurt yield? Now I will tell you the next trifoliate out will be clean and free of these particular specks. But I also want you to think about it, and I liken it to leaf defoliation through insect feeding. If we think about Japanese beetle feeding or bean leaf beetle feeding, up to flowering, we can withstand up to 40% defoliation before we can warrant an insecticide treatment. There's nowhere near 40% defoliation, as you can see from these leaf pictures in front of you. Or once we get to flowering up to pod fill, we can withstand 15% defoliation before we can warrant an insecticide treatment. There's not even 15%. So as you can see, the overall volume of the leaf mass and percentage of that leaf area that's actually impacted through necrosis and that speckling is overall fairly minimal. Do I expect it to hurt yield? I think the impact to yield will be extremely minimal, if any at all. Second thing to expect after we make any Enlist 1 or Enlist dual herbicide application is for the soybeans to droop. So you can see in the pictures in front of you, these are from the London, Ohio site from a year ago. Just a matter of a couple hours later, you can see those Enlist soybeans that were sprayed with Enlist 1, you can see they start to look droopy. They're kind of hunkered down. The petioles lay more parallel with the ground. That's to be expected. That is very normal. And those beans will return to a more normal or typical upright state within a matter of a couple days. It can happen very quickly when we're spraying during the heat. I've seen it occur as quickly as 30 minutes, and I've seen it take as long as a couple hours. Next thing I want to talk a little bit about is the differences between Liberty, what many of you are familiar with, and the systemic herbicides like Enlist. Contact herbicides like Liberty, they impact the weeds, or we can see plant death and weed response very quickly, whereas growth regulator herbicides or systemic herbicides like Enlist, they take a lot longer period of time to have a thorough plant death. Now we go through the field with Enlist herbicides and we can oftentimes see that larger giant ragweed kind of wilted over. We can see that response pretty quickly, but it takes a couple weeks before we see a thorough, complete weed desiccation as opposed to Liberty, which happens much quicker. Next thing I want to talk a little bit about is what to expect when we're mixing group 1 herbicides, okay? So there's an antagonistic effect when we mix group 1s like Fusilade or like clethodim with Enlist herbicides, okay? As you see in the pictures in front of you, it really slows the effectiveness, or I should say the speed of kill with that Enlist herbicide. You can see that on the giant ragweed. When we mix clethodim, we really slow that speed of kill because of that antagonistic effect. One way to counteract that is to increase or elevate that rate of clethodim or that group 1 herbicide by about a third. Okay, so if you're using, say, for example, 8 ounces of a Select 2 EC as a clethodim material to control grasses or volunteer Roundup Ready corn, we would suggest you make that 8 ounces and actually apply it somewhere upwards of upper 10, maybe even 11 ounces to counteract or to account for that antagonistic effect that occurs with Enlist herbicides and those group 1 herbicides. Last thing I'm going to talk about as far as tank mix partners is, do we mix Enlist 1 with glyphosate or do we mix it with Liberty? So Enlist 1 plus glyphosate, probably more readily available depending on your chemical supplier, but it's going to be highly effective on many, some would maybe even say most, depending on your weed spectrum of the weed species that are out there, with a couple exceptions. Enlist 1 plus Liberty is going to be more effective on those mare's tail that we missed with, say, the burn down. It's going to be more effective on large giant ragweed. Enlist 1 plus glyphosate is pretty darn good on giant ragweed up until the point they get to be about 20 inches tall. When they become consistently 20 inches tall, which I know isn't ideal, but it occurs with the weather we've had at times. When they get large, Enlist 1 plus Liberty, now we have 2 effective sites of action on those glyphosate resistant or glyphosate tolerant giant ragweed. The last weed I want to talk about is very, very critical, and it's the most critical one that we look at with an Enlist system to tank mixing with Liberty as opposed to glyphosate. Enlist 1 plus Liberty is going to be much more effective on Waterhemp. Waterhemp is having a really, really prolific year, which is saying a lot for that particular pest, not only in terms of volume of weed emergence, but timing. I actually saw seed heads on Waterhemp that was along a field edge that didn't get any residual as early as about the 10th of June. So it's having a really prolific year. But when we look at Enlist 1 plus Liberty at 20 gallon versus a more typical Enlist 1 plus glyphosate application at 15 gallon, you can see there's a dramatic overall increase in efficacy with that Liberty Enlist 1 tank mix combination. So some things to think about as you think about making Enlist herbicide applications for the first time, or maybe a little bit of review. And I'd encourage you, be proactive. I know in many cases soybeans didn't get the start that we wanted, either in terms of when we planted them or that early growth that we desired, but I encourage you, please don't wait for plant canopy. Apply your post-emergent herbicides 3-4 weeks after you planted the soybeans, regardless of plant canopy, because we know weeds are stealing yield in ways that we had never understood in the past. So with that said, thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.